Good afternoon, everybody. Tammy from Homesteading in the City with Tammy. Today, I'm in my office and we are going to be doing a knitting tutorial. If that is something that interests you, stick around. So before we get started with the tutorial, I wanted to welcome everybody to my YouTube channel. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. If you have not subscribed, please consider doing so. It does benefit me by you subscribing to my YouTube channel. For those of you that have been here from the beginning, I really appreciate that you stop by each week and watch the videos that I put out. It means a lot to me. And also thank you for all you new subscribers that I have out there. It really warms my heart to know that people are subscribing to my channel and like the content that I do. So with that being said, let's get started. So with the needles that you get, depending on the pattern that you are using, and you can search on the internet for Ascot patterns. There's a ton of them out there, free patterns. But like I said, I will link this one in the description below so that you can have this one. I'm following it almost to a T, but not quite, because the size needle they tell you is a 4, but for me, I knit tight and I need actually a size 8 to obtain the gauge that I need for this project. But the patterns will range from a size 4 knitting needle to a size 9 knitting needle, depending on the material, the yarn thickness that you're using, and the size needle that you use. Now this one was stitched with a size 4 needle, this one was stitched with a size 8 needle. The yarn was really small. It was probably a 2 for thickness, and it's very stretchy. And in order for me to get it to be this size, I needed to go up to that size 8 needle. If I would have used the size 4, it would have been like a little kid size. And I did it in a 4 and found out that it was going to be way too small. So I upped to a size 8 needle to get the gauge that I wanted. I am doing it actually, this one is going to be done with a worst weight yarn, a thickness of a 4, and it's 100% acrylic, and it is for a guy, so I want it to be a little bit bigger than this, but not a lot bigger. So I'm going to still use my size 8 to get the size that I want. I believe that's going to give me the size that I need for that. So you'll need a set of knitting needles that are the size that you need to obtain the gauge that you want. And then also some double pointed needles for helping with some of the part of the pattern. And those are the tricks that I'm going to show you on how to do different things in the pattern with these tricks. So the first thing we're going to do is cast on, and I will put a link in the description below of my slow motion cast on that I did in my basic knitting tutorial video. And then also I will put a link in the description of the slow motion for knitting into the front and the back of a loop, because that is what we are going to be doing for this. So let's get started with casting on our project. Now our pattern tells us to cast on 2 stitches. But I don't know if you guys remember from my first video, I do a long tail cast on. But since there's 2 stitches, I don't really need a very long tail, because all I'm going to be doing is wrapping it in and tying it into my first set of stitches. But the long tail cast on that I do, when I do my cast on, it gives me 2 stitches. So right there I have my 2 stitches that I need. So now the next step is to knit into the front and the back of the very first loop. And that is how we are going to increase every round till we get to 38 stitches. But I'm going to show you a little trick here. We are going to tie in our ends. So we are going to take both our tail and our working yarn, and we are going to wrap it around, knit in the first stitch, pull it up, and then we are going to knit into the back of that stitch. And then knit one more to the end of that round. So that got us our stitches cast on. and tight right there. Now we just have to remember that we have 2 loops in each of our stitch here. So when we go to do the next round, as we turn, we just need to work both of those at the same time. And this way we're going to drop our last piece of our tail, and we're only going to work with the working yarn. So again, we're going to increase into the front, in the back of that loop. And like I said before, if you have to rotate to see what you're doing, go ahead. You don't have to keep your needles perfectly straight. And then we're going to knit to the end of the round. That just tied our tail in, so now we don't have to worry that that's going to come out. We could cut that if we wanted to at this point in time. I usually just leave it till the end, but that allows you to have it nice and tight. So now that we have these 4 stitches in, our tail is nice and secure, so we know we're not going to lose that. And we are going to increase the same way until we get a total of 38 stitches, knitting into the front and the back of this very first stitch and knitting the rest of them, turning our work and doing it again. Once we have 38 stitches on our needle, we will need to start counting the number of rows we get, because we need to get a total of 5 inches from the point here to where we split this for our pocket. By counting our stitches, since we put this together, we knit these, then we knit this whole center piece, then we decrease and knit this, and then we knit this other side. We're not going to know, since we're measuring 5 inches, we're not going to know exactly how many stitches we need to do before we start decreasing. So my tip is to, when you get 38 stitches on your needle, start counting your rows till you get 5 inches. Once you reach 5 inches, write down the number of rows that you had to do, so that when you get to this side and you have to do, you know exactly how many rows you're going to do before you have to start decreasing. So that is tip number 1. Make sure you count your rows before you have to separate for your little pocket. So go ahead and start increasing until you get to 38 stitches. And once you get to 38 stitches, start counting until you reach a total of 5 inches from this point to here. Once we get to here, I will show you how we are going to separate for our pocket. So go ahead and start knitting, and I will come back when it's time to separate for our pocket. So now that we got to our 38 stitches, we are just going to keep stitching this back and forth until from the point here to our end matches 5 inches. So we will just keep right on knitting at this point in time. Okay, another little tip I wanted to tell you guys is you're better off, once you cast on and you tie in your first row of stitches, it's best to put a stitch marker on the side that is considered the right side. Since it is the same on both sides and you can't tell the difference, it's nice to mark so you know where you're always on, when you're always on the right side. It will help when you start separating and doing the pocket holes, so that you know you get the right number of stitches and your yarn ends on the correct side that it needs to end on. So now that we're at 5 inches from our point to our needle, we can now start to divide our stitches for our pocket hole. Now, this is where I suggest you use double pointed needles. This was a tip. This is tip number 3 to help with getting this process done easier. The pattern tells you to knit 1 and then slip one on a holder. Knit 2, slip one on a holder. Well, when you have yarn going, a holder going, and you've in another needle, it's a little bit cumbersome. So my suggestion is taking your double pointed needles. You can do them 2 at a time, and you're just going to slip them off this onto here. Once you get 2 done, they go pretty easy. But you can slip them off onto, and we're not knitting all these, we're just slipping them off. And this will allow us to separate these because we need 19 stitches on each needle. Then we can drop one needle and go back and deal with only one needle. This was easier for me to do than it was trying to knit with yarn and slip one on a stitch marker, not lose them off the stitch marker, not drop them out of the yarn, out of the needle. This, I think, was a lot easier. It might not be, and you guys might be able to do the pattern that how it tells you in the pattern. This is just, I felt this was easier for me to do. I seem to be able to control these a little bit better than I could when they were, when I was trying to slip them onto a holder. Just have to remember to alternate your stitches so that you have one on each needle. So now that you have them separate on your needles, you can deal with just the front, which has the yarn onto it. It's a little tight until you get past that second needle there. But to me, it was a lot easier. So now you're going to do a 1x1 rib on just these front 19 stitches, the one that has the yarn coming from it. And you can use your regular needle and get rid of your double pointed at this point and go back to these once you knit it off. My suggestion would be the very last row, you're going to do a 1x1 ribbing, so it's a purl and a knit all the way across, and then you'll do it back. And when you are done with your 23 rows, because you have to do 23 rows for your pocket, when you're done with your 23rd row, that 23rd row I would knit back in with my double pointed needle. That way I don't have to switch it, and I can easily push them back onto a regular needle when I'm done and need to connect them back together to do the body of the scarf. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So it says here to do a purl, knit, all the way across. So our first stitch is going to be a purl. And just making sure that you do not slide the second needle. There's also, they have stoppers that you can. Okay, one of the things I would suggest using is these little stitch stoppers. And you can put them on the ends of the needle that you're not working. That way, if you slide it from one side to the other, your stitches are not going to come off. They might be in the way a little bit until you get a couple of rounds in there, but you can kind of like turn this sideways a little bit when you need to knit with it so that you have it sideways a little bit. Okay, so we've got to purl our first stitch. Okay. Oops, I'm caught. And then knit. And like I said, the first couple on here are a little tight, and it's hard because I'm on the table here too. But it's a 1 by 1 rib, so it's knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. Well, I guess we started with a purl, so it's a purl knit all the way across. Okay, so we've got it down and we have them all onto our regular needle. So now the next row back, this is where you'll be reading your knitting. You are going to you are going to knit your knits and purl your purls. That will give you a nice good ribbing. So on the way back, we are going to knit, purl, and end with a knit. And we are going to repeat those 2 rows till we get 23. And again, I would keep track, whether you have a stitch marker or you just mark it down with a pen on your paper so you know exactly how many rounds that you have, so that you don't get one side longer than the other. Just remember to knit or to mark down after each row when you get finished, instead of waiting for a couple of rounds. So this is why it's really good to put these stoppers on here, because when you are pushing this around to get it to maneuver around these stitches here, because it's pretty tight, you will slide this back and forth, and it keeps it on, and it doesn't let those stitches fall off, and then you have to try to find the stitches and get them back on. So it is definitely a good practice if you're using double pointed needles and you're going to be manipulating the material, the yarn a lot. You will definitely want to put some stoppers on there so that it only goes so far. But it's really one of those things that, I mean, you stretch them a little bit to allow it to go back and forth. So, I mean, I'm not real gentle with this when I turn it sideways to get it so that I can get these stitches off my needle and keep them away from this needle on itself. Once you get a little bit further away, it's not going to be as much of a problem, but until you get further away, you're still going to be hitting this needle back here that it gets in your way. So it's just easier to kind of twist it a little bit and work back and forth that way. So that is another little tip that I am giving you. But see, if I wouldn't have that stopper there, those stitches would slide right off. But once I get a little bit further away, that needle will not be an issue anymore, and it won't cause problems. But it's a little tight in the beginning. I mean, your stitch holders are usually a little bit smaller, but it's just a lot. I noticed that it was a lot of swapping needles back and forth. And I tend to lose stitches when you're sliding them back and forth because they slip off the needle, and This seemed to be the easiest for me to do, not having to lose so many stitches by sliding them onto a double pointed needle and putting the ends on it so that I could keep it where I needed to. And you can slide it from side to side to kind of get it out of your way as best you can. But don't forget when you get done to mark down the number of rows that you've done so that you can keep track of your stitches. But as you can see, let me mark down my rows. Okay, but as you can see, we've got a nice rib going there, a 1 by 1 rib. So you're going to work that till you get 25 stitches, or sorry, 23 rounds. You're going to work this till you get 23 rounds, and then we will cut our yarn. But I'll come back just before we're done with that so I can show you what we're going to do with cutting the yarn and starting on the other side. So go ahead and finish your 1 by 1 rib till you have 23 rounds, and then I will come back and we will show you what to do next. Okay, so now that we have our one side done with our 23 rows, we can flip it over to the other side. Oh, actually, we're going to cut our yarn here, leaving quite a bit of a tail just so that we don't lose any stitches on there. Then we are going to deal with our other side. Now, remembering that we started on this side, we are going to start our cast on over on this side. We can take these off and we can put them on our other needle that is now idle. And we are going to take our tail and we are going to purl our first one, and add on our stitch. Then take both of our pieces to the back and knit. Bring them both to the front and purl. We are going to tie in our tail at this point in time, making sure that we leave the stitch in the center when we purl. So this will be the last one we do, leaving it in the center when we purl so that that stitch, that tail stays in the center. And then we're just going to knit, purl all the way around, or all the way to the end, and that will have gotten our other flap started. And then we're going to do 23 more rows of a 1 by 1 ribbing. Making sure again that you count your rows so you know where you're at. And once we get to the end of that, I will show you how we are going to add these two together to start doing our middle section. So go ahead and work this as a 1 by 1 rib all the way across for 23 rounds, and then I will come back and I will show you how we are going to connect these two and start on the center part of the scarf. Now that you have your pocket flaps done even for both sides and they're in your double pointed needles, now you need to slide these stitches onto one needle. Now you're going to do this by taking off your ends here, your stoppers, but you're also going to make sure that the first stitch you slip is the one that has the tail that ends. You want to make sure you end with your working yarn. So you'll slip one from here onto your working needle. And just keep alternating, working them onto the working needle. Being careful not to slip them off before you're ready to put them on the needle. This takes a little bit of time, but it does make it easier when you go to knit your first row. Just making sure that you're alternating every other needle when you pull it through. Okay, so now that you have all of your stitches back onto one needle, you can start knitting across. And this is where you will take your first stitch, but you'll also take the tail of the other end of that side and you'll knit them together to try to knit in your tail, knit them across. And then this is where we're actually doing the body of the scarf here, and it's this section here, and we're just going to knit back and forth all the way across, just turning and knitting back and forth. There is not a number of stitches to do for this. This is done by length. Usually they tell you to wrap it around your neck to the length that you want. I know when I did all of these, 13 inches from here to here, where I had to separate for the other pocket hole, was what worked good for this. This is a smaller and it's stretchier, where this material, this yarn that I'm using here, is really not all that stretchy. So I will just keep trying it on to make sure it's the length that I need it to be. So I will show you how to tie this end in, and then we can just go ahead and knit to the length that you need for your scarf. So you have your working yarn and your tail from the other loop together. You're going to wrap it around your needle to knit, and you're just going to keep both of them going all the way across. When your yarn ends, we're just going to actually take our little crochet hook that we have to use, and we'll end up pulling the tail into the center of our pocket so that we have that hidden in there. So you're just going to knit across till you get all the way to the end and connect the two rows together, and then you can start knitting for your length of your scarf. Okay, so that was too short to keep going, so just let it hang there. And when I get all the way back to the end, I'll show you what I'm going to do with that stitch there. Okay, almost to the end here. And these they end up being a little tight because they're twisted to be onto the 2 needles. But to me, it's a lot easier to slide them back on from 2 needles back onto 1 instead of trying to knit them off 1 needle and connect the tail in so that it actually is being knitted in and it doesn't unravel on you. Okay, so now that we have that done, we have our tail right here. We're just going to take our little crochet hook here, and I'm just going to put it through here and wrap my yarn around it and bring it through, just so that it's in the middle. I just want my tail so that it's hid in the center of this and you don't see it. So that's how we get rid of that tail. And once I do a couple more, you can actually weave it into a couple of stitches in here so that it'll weave down and lay down. And you just weave it through a couple of the loops there. And then it'll lay flat. So that is how you connect those together and hide that tail. Now just go ahead and keep knitting until you get it to the length that you want. And I will come back and I will show you again how to separate for our second pocket. So I will come back and show you that once we get it to the length that we need it. So now that we have our ascot made to the length that we need, we're going to divide onto our 2 double-pointed needles for the other end of the pocket hole that we are going to do. So I will show you how to do that again. It is going to be slip from this that we're carrying here. We're going to slip every other one onto each one of these needles here so that we can have 2 to run up to do the pocket hole. So let me show you how to do that again real quick. And it's a little cumbersome at first until you get used to doing it. But I do feel that this makes it a lot easier to work these 2 pieces than to knit off of this one onto another needle and then slip the next one onto a stitch holder into the back. I tried that and I ended up losing a lot of stitches. So that's very frustrating. Just have to remember which one you're going to and move them all off. And this way with double pointed needles, you're able to, oops, a little too far on that one. You're able to work out of either end. So it's not a big deal that you've put the needle in the wrong way. It's not a lot of extra pushing around of a needle. Now, if you don't have a double pointed needle, absolutely you can use regular needles with the end. You're just going to have to, when you get done, you're going to have to re-slide them onto a needle to get to the working yarn that is on the other end of these. So that's it. I mean, it can be done. It's just a lot of extra sliding, and lot of chance of being missing stitches. Okay, so there we go. That is all onto a needle, so that all they have to do is work each one off. So now go ahead and work whichever one has the carrying yarn. So the one in the back, work that one up to the length that you need it, break your yarn, and then hook on and work this one up to the length that you need it. And then once you get those done, I'll bring you back and we will show you how to slide them back onto one needle and then try to work the rest of our pattern. So go ahead and do that and we'll be back in a flash. Okay, so now that we have both of our little sleeves or our little pocket sides holes done here, we're going to again put both of these sets of needles onto one double pointed needle so that we can move it off of either side. We could, if you only have these, you can put it onto this. It's just you're going to have to knit it back, slide it back off onto another needle so that you can work your working yarn, since it's going to be on this end. So we're going to make sure the tail that is hanging to your skein of yarn, this is the first stitch that you are going to slip onto your double pointed needle. So you'll take this one from here, one back and forth until you get them all onto one needle again. Just remembering to hold the stitches so that they don't slide off your needle. Last thing you want to do is when you're almost done with your scarf to lose a stitch and have to redo everything. So just take your time and slide them from one needle to the other, alternating front and back of the stitches so that you're getting everything back on kind of in the order that it was when you took it off, when you separated it to begin with. Okay, so now that you have this all on here, then you can start to knit these back again and making your other end, which is the little like a heart shape type thing. And this is where it comes in handy when you counted your rows of how many you needed before you had to decrease. This is where you're going to start counting those rows so that you know how many rows you need to have before you start to doing your decrease to get to your point. So go ahead and look at what you have, and then you can just start doing your knitting again. And then once you get to the point to decrease, decrease until you get your, I believe it's 2 stitches at the end. And then you will cast off those 2 stitches and you are done after you weave in your ends. So go ahead and start doing that, and then I will meet you at the end when we are about ready to cast off the last few stitches so that we can show you how to do that, and then we'll weave in the ends. So I will see you back here in just a few minutes. So one quick thing, you have your running tail that is connected to your yarn, but you also have the tail for the other side that you would cut. When you start to knit, you're going to take both of those tails into your first stitch that you do, just like this. You're going to put in, you're going to take both those tails and wrap around. That way you're going to tie those tails in. It'll keep this stitch tight because you've got it into this one here. And you just work your tail in till it's done into the stitches, and then make sure you pull it on the inside of this little pocket hole that we're making. So that's about the last that I can do without it really sticking out. So then I will just, once I'm done, I will take my little crochet hook and I will go in from in here and I will pull that. I will put my crochet hook up, I will hook that in, and I will pull it down so it's in the middle of this, and you'll never see that tail. So that's just a little tip on getting your tail weaved in so that that second stitch is nice and tight. Just remember when you go back to knit these that you don't divide these 5 sets of stitches that have 2 legs on them. Use them as one. Okay, so now that we are down to the last 3 stitches that we have on our needles, now we can bind off these last 3 stitches and we are done with our ascot. So it's just going to do knit, and then your bind off. And then just cut your tail. And then you're just gonna tie your knot and weave that end in. And then you just weave your end in, and you are all finished with your ascot. Well, everybody, that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed making the ascot with me. I think it's a kind of a fun project to do, and I hope my husband will really enjoy it when he's out hunting this year to keep his neck warm. If you have not subscribed, please consider doing so. It does benefit me by you subscribing to my YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. And thank you, and have a good day. Bye.